discarded by the mission that promised to save her. A Lakota chief did not ask her to earn it. I will tell you about the morning Winona came back. I was splitting cedar behind the council lodge when I heard the horse. One horse, slow, and by the sound of the hooves I could tell the animal was tired before I could see it. I set the axe down and walked around the corner of the lodge, and there she was, sitting on a gray mare that didn't belong to her, her back straight the way she'd been taught to hold it by those people, wearing a gray dress that was too big through the shoulders and not enough at the hem for a November morning. Her hair was loose. Not loose the way a young woman wears it sometimes in summer, loose the way something has been undone. She didn't look at me. She was looking at the ground, just past the mare's left ear. I knew who she was. I had watched her leave 4 years before. Her father, Tatanka Ska, had made the arrangement with the mission, a school they called it, a place of learning they said, and her father believed them because he was a man who wanted things for his daughter that the world as it was being made did not seem ready to give her. I understood that. I had known Tatanka Ska since we were young men running together on the plains before the world became what it became, and he was not a foolish man. He was a hopeful man, which is different. The mission was 2 days' ride east, Presbyterian. They had been in the territory 7 years by then, and they wore their certainty the way some men wear good boots, comfortable, broken in, confident they'll never need anything else. I walked toward her. I said her name. She looked up. I had not seen Winona since she was 16. She was 20 now, or close to it. Her father had gone the winter before, a sickness that moved through the camp and took 4 people in 2 weeks, and Tatanka Ska was the 4th. I had wrapped him in the blanket he'd used since the year I first knew him, the one with the red stripe along one edge that had faded to a color that had no name anymore. I had been the one to tell her mother. Her mother had looked at me and said, in a voice that did not shake, that Winona should be told. I had said I would tell her. Her mother had said, then you will have to go to the mission. I said I would do that. Her mother said you cannot go to the mission. I said I know that. And I had not gone, and I had not sent anyone because every man I would have trusted to carry a message like that was needed, and every man I did not fully trust I did not want in the presence of my people's grief. I had told myself I would send for her in the spring. The spring came and I did not send, not because I forgot. I did not forget. I thought about it many times and I kept not doing it, and I did not ask myself why. That is a thing I have thought about since. I think I was afraid of what she had become there, and afraid that whatever she had become there would bring a kind of argument I did not have the patience for. That is not something I am proud of. She had found out about her father some other way. I don't know how, she never told me. I said her name again. I said, come down from there. She got down from the horse. She was not quite steady when her feet touched the ground, but she recovered quickly and stood straight. The gray dress had a torn seam at the left shoulder. I did not look at it directly. I looked at her face. She said, in Lakota, good Lakota, the kind she would have had to work to keep inside a place that taught her to abandon it, she said, I have no place to go. I said, you are home. She looked at me then the way a person looks at you when they are trying to find the lie in something. Not hostile, careful. The way you look at ice on a river you need to cross, checking the weight of it, checking if it will hold. I am telling you this because I want you to understand what kind of woman she was, even then, even having come through whatever she had come through at that place. She did not weep. She did not ask to be forgiven for something she hadn't done. She stood in the cold in a dress that didn't fit, and she looked at me like she was deciding whether to believe that the ice would hold. I said, come inside. There is food and there is a fire. She tied the mare to the post herself. She didn't wait for me to do it. I have been leading this band since I was 34 years old. I am 61 now. That is 27 years of making decisions that were sometimes right and sometimes wrong and always permanent. You do not get to go back. You decide and then you live in what you decided. The men I have seen fail at this work, and I have seen a few, most of them failed not because they were cruel or stupid, but because they could not carry the decisions after they made them. The weight of a decision that hurts someone is different from the weight of a decision that cost you. I have made both kinds. I have carried both kinds. The people of my band numbered 112 that winter. We were settled on the agency land. The word they used, agency, as though we were children being managed. In a way, I suppose we were, though I never said that to anyone but myself, and I still dislike saying it even now. We had 112 people, a grazing arrangement that the agent, a man named Corbett who smelled of cloves and never looked at you directly, changed twice a year in ways that cost us the best water. We had horses that we were permitted to have, and horses that we were not permitted to have, and I kept the ones we were not permitted to have in a canyon 3 miles from camp that Corbett did not know about, and I intend to die without ever having told him. I tell you this so you understand the kind of problems I was carrying the morning Winona came back. When a man is carrying that kind of weight, and a young woman rides in alone on someone else's horse wearing a dress with a torn seam and says she has no place to go, there is one question that everyone around you will ask even if they do not ask it out loud. The question is, what will you do with her? The camp knew about the mission. They knew Winona had gone there, and they knew, because word travels on the plains the way water travels, that the mission had sent other young women back. Not all of them. Some had stayed. Some had become teachers themselves in the mission school, but some had come back and the reasons were never fully told, and people filled in what they weren't told with what they imagined, and what people imagine is almost always worse than what happened. I'm not saying what happened to Winona at the mission. That is her account to give or not give. What I will say is that she was sent away from it. I know this because she told me in pieces over several weeks, not all at once. The way a person tells something hard one part here, another part later, when the trust has had time to settle. What I gathered was that she had argued with one of the mission's teachers. A woman named Drury, a thin woman with small eyes who Winona described once, with a precision that made me understand exactly who she was. This Drury had been in charge of the girls. Winona had said something in Lakota to another girl, a small thing, a small comfort between two girls who were far from their mothers, and Drury had called it defiance, had called it backsliding, had called it evidence that Winona was not, as she put it, receptive to the Lord's purposes. What Drury meant was that Winona would not be made into something other than herself, and that this inability or refusal amounted to a failure of character. The mission's investment in her was, in Drury's view, wasted. They had given her the dress. They had given her the gray mare, which was not a kindness but a way of making themselves feel generous while putting someone out. They had given her a letter addressed to the agency which Winona gave to me that first morning, and which I read, and then set aside on the fire without mentioning to anyone. The letter said that Winona White Elk had not demonstrated sufficient progress in her spiritual development to warrant further resources. The word resources. 4 years of a girl's life described as resources. I burned the letter and I did not tell Winona what it said. She probably knew already. The question of where she would sleep was the first one I had to answer. Her mother's lodge was the obvious answer, except that her mother had not been well since the previous winter, and the lodge was already crowded with her mother's sister's family. I spoke to Winona's aunt, a woman named Chayton's wife, which is what everyone called her because Chayton had been a well-known man, and she carried that with pride even after he was gone, and the aunt said there was no room. She said this without looking at Winona. I did not argue. I understood what the aunt was doing. She was doing what people do when they are afraid of what others will say. I understood it, and I did not respect it. Those two things can be true at the same time. There was a lodge at the edge of camp that had been empty since early fall, a small lodge that had belonged to an old man named Hehaka who had gone to live with his son's family near the agency headquarters. The lodge was sound. The cover needed one repair on the north-facing side where a seam had separated, but the poles were good and the lining was intact. I had 2 women, Spotted Woman and her daughter, restitch the seam that afternoon. I sent my nephew, a boy of 14 named Runs at Dawn, to bring wood enough for a week. I sent word to the woman who managed the food stores to bring what was owed to a full member of the band. I did all of this in plain view. I made no quiet arrangements, no arrangements through other people. I did it myself in daylight, where anyone who wanted to watch could watch. Some did watch. I heard what was said. Not all of it reached me directly, but enough of it did. 2 women who had been at the agency school, who had come back the year before and been welcomed without comment, were among the loudest. This I noted. The things people say about others tell you exactly what they're afraid of being said about themselves. I noted it and did not say anything about it to anyone. Winona moved into Hehaka's lodge that evening. She spent the first week mostly alone. I saw her at the morning fire. We gathered, most of us, at the large fire in the center of camp in the mornings, and she sat at the edge of it. Not quite in the group, not quite apart from it. She ate what was given. She said almost nothing. She was not sulking. She was watching. I recognized this because I do it myself. When you are in a new situation, even a situation that should feel familiar, you watch first. You learn what has changed while you were gone, and then you decide how to move in it. Some people are kind to those who are quiet. Some people are unkind. In my experience, the people who are unkind to someone sitting quietly at the edge of a fire are not fundamentally cruel people. They are worried people. They are people who have an idea of what the quiet person might say or do eventually, and the idea worries them. And they convert worry into coldness, because coldness feels more like strength than worry does. The woman who was most cold to Winona in those first days was a woman named Pale River Woman, who was married to one of my younger warriors, a man named Lakota. Pale River Woman had a daughter a little younger than Winona, who she was raising carefully. Carefully meaning she was watching every influence that came near the girl the way you watch a new horse near a fence. One sudden movement, one skitter, and you're pulling your child back before the thing happens. Pale River Woman was not an unkind woman in general. She was a frightened mother, which is a different thing and not less powerful. I watched all of this without intervening. A leader who smooths every rough thing before it has a chance to settle teaches his people that roughness is unbearable. I believe roughness is bearable. I believe most things are bearable if a person is given enough time and enough food and a fire they can sit near. The thing that changed it, not all at once, but in the way that things actually change, which is one small thing and then another, was horses. The mission had not taught Winona to forget horses. I don't think it had tried. Whatever they were teaching her there, the horses had been present and she knew them. She had known them her whole life. One morning in the second week, I came around the corral at the south end of camp and found her there with a bay horse called Hoop that had been difficult since September, a horse that had thrown 2 riders and that I was thinking of trading away. She was standing at his shoulder, not facing him, facing away at a slight angle, one hand resting on his neck just below the mane, not doing anything, just being there. The horse had his head down. I stopped. I stood still for a long time. She said, without turning to look at me, that the horse had a stone bruise on his right front foot. She said she had checked when she first came into the corral, and he had flinched when she pressed along the sole. She said he had probably been compensating for 3 weeks, maybe longer, and that was why he was difficult. He wasn't mean. He was hurting. I looked at her for a moment. I asked how she knew about stone bruises. She said her father had taught her when she was small, and then the mission's stable hand, a Mexican man named Firo who she seemed to hold in some affection, had told her the same things again in a different language, and knowing something twice in 2 languages makes it more certain. I said, "What does he need?" She said, 3 weeks off the foot, soaking every other day, and someone to come stand with him for a while each morning, not doing anything, just being there so he knows he's not alone in it. I said I would arrange the soaking. She said she could do the standing. That was how it started. By the fourth week she was working with 3 of the horses regularly. Not because I asked her to. Because she came to the corral in the mornings and the horses knew her, and the people who worked with the horses started to know her, and the knowing spread the way warmth spreads from a fire in a small room slowly, without announcement, until you realize you are no longer cold. Pale River Woman's daughter, the girl she was protecting so carefully, was named Raining. Raining was 13, and she loved horses in the helpless way that girls that age love things fully, without self-consciousness, without any ability to pretend otherwise. She had been watching Winona from a distance for 2 weeks. One morning she was at the corral before Winona arrived. I saw her position herself near the gate where Winona would have to pass her. Winona stopped. She looked at the girl. She said in Lakota, "Which one is yours?" Raining pointed to a small brown mare. Winona looked at the mare and then back at Raining and said, "Has she ever spooked at rabbits?" Raining thought about it and said yes. Once when she was younger, a jackrabbit had come out of the grass on the right side. Winona nodded. She said, "Then when you're riding her out on the flat, put her into the grass from the right side a few times when you know nothing is there. Let her feel the brush on her right flank when it's safe. She'll stop expecting the bad thing to come from that side." Raining looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "How do you know which side the bad thing comes from?" Winona said, "You watch the horse. You watch where she holds her tension. The side she holds her tension is the side she's been hurt before." I was on the far side of the corral. I don't think either of them knew I was there. I stayed where I was. I will tell you something about myself that I do not often tell. I was married once. My wife's name was Tawasai, which means her heart. She was called that because when she was born her grandmother had looked at her and said, "This child has a heart bigger than her chest." Her grandmother was right. Tawasai had been dead for 11 years by the time Winona came back. A fever. Quick. The kind of quick that gives you no time to say the things you mean to say. And so, you stand next to the person who is leaving and say nothing useful, and then they are gone, and the nothing useful is what you have left. I do not say this to make you feel sorry for me. I say it because it is the context in which I watched Winona, and a man's context shapes what he sees. After Tawasai I will say it plainly, I had not looked at a woman the way a man looks at a woman he might love. I had looked at women the way a leader looks at the people he is responsible for. I had arranged marriages, settled disputes, spoken at births and deaths and the things between. I had done what was needed. But that particular looking, the kind that is not obligation but is something older and more personal than obligation, that I had put away. Not because I decided to put it away. Because it went away on its own, the way the range grass goes brown in August, and I had not tried to bring it back. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that what happened between Winona and me did not happen quickly, and did not happen because I was lonely, though I was, and did not happen because she needed protecting, though she did. It happened because of something else, something I did not have a name for until much later, and I will get to the name when I get to it. The winter deepened. November became December. The cold was the particular kind of cold we get on the northern plains that is not dramatic, no blizzard, no howling, just a gray pressing cold that settles into everything and does not lift. The kind of cold that makes small fires necessary and makes people gather. I had a habit, those winters, of walking the perimeter of the camp at night, not because I was scouting for anything specific. Because walking at night in the cold clears a certain kind of thinking that does not clear any other way. The camp was quiet by the time I walked, most fires low, a few horses moving in the dark at the corral, the sound of someone coughing in one of the lodges. One night in December I came around the south end of camp, and there was a fire small at the edge of the corral, and Winona sitting beside it with a blanket around her shoulders. Hoop the bay horse was standing near her, his head low, his ears soft. I said, "You should be inside." She said, "I heard him moving. He was restless." She paused and said, Sometimes at night when something hurts more than usual, being alone with it is the hardest part. I sat down on the other side of the fire. I did not say anything. She said, "When I was at the mission at night, I used to think about this camp. Not the specific things, the sound of it, the fires at night, the way they smell different from other fires. I don't know why they smell different." I said, "Cedar. We use more cedar than most." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My father used cedar." I said, "Yes, he always had." She looked into the fire. She said, "I didn't know until I left what the smell of home was. You only know what a thing is when you've been where it isn't." I said, "That's true." She looked at me then. Not the way she had looked at me that first morning not checking the ice. Something else. She said, "Why did you give me the lodge?" I said, "It was empty and you needed it." She said, "That's not the whole answer." I thought about that. I said, "No, it isn't." She waited. I said, "Because you came back, and the things that come back deserve a place to land." She held that for a while without answering. Then she said, "Drury, the woman at the mission, she said I was intractable. She said I was too proud." I said, "Were you?" She said, "I spoke Lakota to a girl who was afraid and needed to hear something true in her own language. Is that pride?" I said, "No, that is kindness, and some people cannot tell the difference." The horse moved. Hoop shifted his weight, turned, put his nose down toward Winona's shoulder. She reached up without looking and laid her hand against his jaw. I sat there a while longer. Then I said good night and I walked back to my lodge. January. The thing about January on the plains is that it demands the truth. There is nowhere to put things in January. The cold takes everything that isn't essential and strips it away, and what's left is what's actually there. You find out in January what a person is made of, what an arrangement is made of, whether the things you've been calling strong are actually strong, or whether they're just things you've been calling strong because you needed them to be. Corbett, the agent, made an announcement in the first week of January. He sent a rider with a written notice, which he knew perfectly well most people in the camp could not read, and which I read to those who came to hear it. The notice said that due to revisions in the allocation of agency resources, there was that word again, the grazing arrangement would be adjusted. The new arrangement moved us off the creek bottomland that we had been using and onto the upland flats to the north, which were higher and more exposed and, in January, useless. The water there was 3 miles farther. The grass was thin and frozen. I read the notice twice. I folded it carefully. I told the people what it said. There was a silence that was not the silence of acceptance. It was the silence of people holding themselves very still so they could think. Lakota spoke first. He said, in the measured voice of a young man trying to be controlled, that this would hurt the horses. The horses needed the bottomland. The young and the old animals especially would suffer on the upland flats in January. I said I understood. He said, "What will you do?" I said, "I will go to the agency." He said, and I do not fault him for it because he was young and he was angry, "You always go to the agency. You always go and you always come back and nothing is different." There was another silence. This one had a different quality. Everyone was looking at me. I said, "I have gone to the agency and I have come back with less than I wanted. That is true. I have also come back each time. I have come back with the horses in the hidden canyon. I have come back with the food stores that Corbett thinks are depleted and are not. I have come back with the arrangements we have that Corbett does not know we have. Some of what I have done has looked like nothing from the outside, and I understand why it looks like nothing. I cannot always explain what I am doing while I am doing it, but I have not lost anyone to starvation in 27 years. I have not lost anyone to a war we could not win. I ask that you hold that while you are angry." Lakota looked at me for a long time. Then he sat down. I went to the agency the next morning. I will not tell you every detail of what happened at the agency over the next 3 weeks, because some of it was tedious. The particular tedium of men with power who mistake procedure for principle. And some of it was the kind of maneuvering that only makes sense if you know all the pieces, and I don't want to spend your time on the pieces. I will tell you the result. I got half of the bottomland back. Not all of it. Half. The half with the best water and the sheltered bend where the horses could get out of the wind. Corbett looked at me when he signed the amended order and said, in the voice of a man who is trying to sound like he's doing you a favor while resenting having to do it, "You're a persistent man, charging elk." I said I am. He seemed to want me to thank him. I did not thank him. I took the order and I left. When I came back to camp, it was late afternoon. The light was going. I could smell the fires already, the cedar smell, as I came down off the ridge. I was tired in the deep way you get tired when you've been holding yourself careful for a long time and you can finally stop. Winona was at the corral. She had heard my horse and she was watching. When I dismounted, she came and took the reins. She said, "Did you get it?" I said, "Half." She looked at me. She said, "Is half enough?" I said, "For the horses, yes. For the rest of it, I will tell her." I thought about this for a moment. I said, "Half is what's there to get. I take what's there and I come back." She was quiet, looking at my horse, running her hand along the animal's neck in the automatic way of someone who has been handling horses a long time. Then she said, "You know, people here think you should fight differently. Lakota." I said, "I know what Lakota thinks." She said, "What do you think about what Lakota thinks?" No one had asked me that before. Not directly. Not like that. I stood there in the cold with my horse's reins in her hand, and she was looking at me waiting for an actual answer, not the answer I would give at a council, not the careful answer, but the true one. I said, "I think Lakota is a brave and angry young man, and I think the bravery and the anger are the same thing, and I think both of them come from love, and I honor that. I think the world as it is now will kill a brave and angry young man faster than it will yield to him, and that knowledge lives in me every day, and I carry it the way you carry a heavy stone, not because you want to, but because someone has to carry it, and the weight of it keeps you grounded." She looked at me for a long time. She said, "Who carries it with you?" I didn't have an answer to that right away. I said, "No one for a long time now, no one." She said quietly without looking away, "That's too long." I said, "Yes." She handed me the reins. She said, "The horse needs water and some hay, then go eat. There is food at my fire tonight." She walked back toward the lodge. I stood with my horse in the gray cold watching her go, and I felt something shift in my chest, something that had been locked for a long time, and I understood that the name I had not been able to find for what was happening was simply this: I had been seen. Not my position, not my decisions, me. The man underneath the decisions, the man who carried the stone, the man who had been carrying it alone. She had looked at exactly that man and said, "That's too long." I took the horse to water. I ate at her fire. February came with snow and a different kind of quiet. The half of the bottomland that we had held was holding. The horses were in better condition than they should have been in February. Hoop's foot had healed cleanly. Winona and I had fallen into a habit that I had not formally arranged and had not thought to stop. In the evenings, after the camp had settled, I would come to her fire and we would sit, not always talking, sometimes talking at length. She had a way of asking questions that were not really questions. They were more like openings, an opening in a wall that she held out and waited to see if you'd step through. And I found that I stepped through when she held them open. I told her things I had not told anyone since Tawassai, not the same things, different things, things that had accumulated in the years between, the way you accumulate things when you have no one to put them down with. She told me things too, slowly, about the mission, about what it had been like to be in a place that wanted you to become a person you were not, and to resist it quietly in small ways over 4 years, because open resistance meant you would lose everything. The food, the warmth, the company of the other girls, the letters home, and so you had to resist the way water resists, which is to find the places it can move and move there. She said, I kept my language by talking to the horses. They don't care what language you speak. And Firo, the stable hand, he spoke Spanish and some Lakota and some English, and he never cared which I used. He just wanted to know that I was doing right by the animals. I said, a good man. She said, a very good man. Lonely, I think. Lonely the way people are who live between languages and don't fully belong to any of them. I knew that loneliness. I did not say so, but she looked at me and I think she knew that I knew it. One night in late February she asked me about Tawisai. She asked carefully, not prying, just opening the wall. She said, your wife, what was she like? I thought about how to answer. I said, she was the kind of person who made a room feel settled when she walked into it. Not loud, not performing, just settled. Like a fire that has been burning the right amount of time, steady and warm, not crackling and not dying. She had patience with difficult things, and she was funny in a dry way that caught you off guard. And she was the one I told things to. The stone things. She held one end. Winona said, how long has it been? I said, 11 years. She said, that is too long to hold it alone. And she didn't say it with pity. She said it like a fact, matter-of-factly, the way you'd say the weather or the season, just a fact about the world. I looked at her for a long time. I said, yes, it is. March. The snows were thinning. The creek was running under the ice, you could hear it, a sound that means the world is still doing what it's supposed to do even when everything else is uncertain. The horses were restless. Restless horses in March is a good sign. It means they're ready. Pale River Woman came to me on a morning in early March. She stood at the entrance of the council lodge and asked if she could speak. I said yes, and she came in, and she sat down across from me with the careful posture of someone who has decided something and is holding it steadily. She said, I want to speak about Winona. I waited. She said, I was wrong about her. I was afraid for my daughter, and I put that fear onto a person who had done nothing. And now my daughter follows Winona around the corral every morning and asks her questions about horses, and Winona answers every question without making Raining feel foolish for asking. I said nothing. She said, Winona told Raining something last week. I was not supposed to hear it, but I was nearby. Raining asked her why she came back here, and Winona said, because this is where I am from. And some things you carry inside you that don't belong to any place, but some things only live in the place you're from. And if you lose those things, you lose a part of yourself that can't be made somewhere else. Pale River Woman looked at me. She said, that is a true thing. I said, it is. She said, she is good for this camp. I said, yes. Pale River Woman stood up. She smoothed her skirt in the way women do when they are finishing something and going back to work. She said, at the entrance, I think she is good for more than just the camp, and she left before I could say anything. I had not, up to then, allowed myself to think in any formal way about what my feelings for Winona were or what they might be. I am not a man who does a great deal of formal thinking about feelings. I note them the way you note weather. You note it, you account for it, you adjust what you're doing accordingly. I had noted the feelings. I had not done anything about them. Part of this was the difference in our ages. I am 61 now. I was 60 then, or close to it. She was 20. I did not take this lightly. A man who takes advantage of the situation he has created, the lodge, the protection, the welcome, to place a young woman in a position where she feels obligated to him, that is not a man I have any respect for. I had seen it done. It is done with smiles and kindness that has a price hidden underneath it, and the woman only finds the price later when she is already inside the arrangement and has no easy way out of it. I did not want that. I wanted, if anything was to happen at all, if anything was meant to happen, I wanted it to come from her freely, not from gratitude, not from obligation, freely. So I said nothing, and I waited. The first real warm day came at the end of March. The kind of day the plains deliver once in a while between the cold and the hot. A day that is simply itself, blue sky and a west wind that has some warmth in it, and the sound of birds that have come back ahead of what you expected. I walked out to the south corral in the morning, and the horses were doing what horses do on the first warm day, moving, circling, shaking their manes, generally behaving as though they had invented the concept of being alive. Winona was there already. She had Hoop on a lead line, walking him in large, slow circles, watching his gait. He was moving clean. 4 months and he was moving clean. I stood at the fence and watched. She brought him around and stopped near me and looked at the horse and said, "Sound. He's sound." I said, "Yes, you knew he would be." She said, "I hoped, knowing is after the fact." We stood there in the warm wind for a while. The horse put his nose over the fence toward me, and I scratched behind his ear. She said, not looking at me, looking at the horse, "I want to say something." I said, "All right." She said, "When I came back here I had nothing. I don't mean the horse and the dress and no money, though that was true too. I mean I had been told for 4 years that the person I was needed to be changed, fixed, made into something acceptable. And enough of that, even when you know it's wrong, even when you fight it every day, enough of that gets inside you. And you start to wonder." She paused. Hoop moved against her shoulder. She said, "You never asked me to be different. You gave me a place and a fire, and you never asked me to earn it. I want you to know what that meant. I want you to know it because I think you should know that you did something important, and I don't think anyone has told you that in a while." I did not say anything right away. I looked at the horse. I looked at the sky. I looked at her profile, the set of her jaw, the east wind moving the loose edge of her hair. I said, "Winona." She looked at me. I said, "I have wanted to say something also, and I will say it plainly because I am too old to be indirect about things that matter. You have, in the time you have been here, you have become the other end of the stone I carry. You have been the person who holds the other end, and I did not ask you to do that, and you did it anyway, and that is the most." I stopped. I was not finding the words I wanted. I said, "You have given me something I stopped expecting to have. And I think you should know that too." She looked at me for a long time. The west wind was still warm. The horses were moving behind her. She said, "You're the first person in a long time who has looked at me and seen something worth keeping." I said, "You were always worth keeping. Some people just couldn't see it." She reached out and put her hand on my arm, not dramatically. The way you put your hand on something you're deciding about, feeling the solidity of it, the actual weight. Then she left her hand there and looked at me with something in her face that I do not have good enough words for. It was not the way she had looked at me the first morning, checking the ice. It was the way you look at something when you've checked it and it held, and now you are just looking at it because you want to. I will finish with this. We did not have a ceremony right away. We talked through the spring and into the summer, and I spoke with the appropriate people, including Winona's mother, who took my hand in both of hers when I came to speak with her and said nothing for a moment and then said, "My husband would have been glad." That is all she said. That was enough. The ceremony was in July, when the grass was long. I will not describe all of it. I will describe one moment. At some point in the evening, after the formal parts were done, I was standing at the edge of the gathering looking out toward the south. The sun was going. The plains were the color they get when the sun is low, a warm color, like the inside of a piece of old cedar. I could hear the people behind me, the sound of a gathering that is content, well-fed, not afraid for the moment. I was thinking about Tawisai. I think that is permitted. I was thinking about her, and I was also thinking about what comes after grief, how you do not replace a person, how you do not fill an absence, how what actually happens is that you grow a new part of yourself that was not possible before the absence, And that part of yourself is the part that can hold what comes next. I felt Winona come to stand beside me. She did not say anything. She stood close enough that her shoulder was against my arm, and she looked out at the same plains I was looking at. After a while she said, "What are you thinking about?" I said, "Growing things." She looked at me. Then she looked back out at the plains, and she stayed there at my side while the last of the light went down. The cedar smell was in everything. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And I knew it, which is the thing most men never get, not the place but the knowing.